Good morning. I'm Laura Miller. I'm your worship associate this morning. Community Church Unitarian Universalist gathers in person and virtually in these unaccustomed times. Our purpose is to form a community to practice and advance a free and responsible search for truth and meaning as a progressive, open-minded, and inclusive religious community. We believe we need not think alike to love alike. Ours is a faith in action as we do the work of justice and compassion in our quest to live ethically, recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of all. We welcome those who come in the spirit of love. You are welcomed here. And I believe Marilyn has a special announcement.
I would like to invite newcomers to our church or people who have been attending for a while or members, whatever, anybody, to come to a newcomers orientation meeting to learn more about our church and what our faith is about next Sunday immediately following the service. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'd now like to introduce our guest speaker today, the Reverend Justin McCreary. Justin officially became a UU in 2010 and began serving the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Jackson in 2013. Justin received preliminary fellowship with the Unitarian Universalist Association in 2019 and was ordained by the Unitarian Universalist Church of Jackson on November 3rd, 2019. During his tenure at UUCJ, Justin has had the opportunity to serve not just the church, but the greater Jackson area in regular social action, along with Mississippi Immigrants' Rights Alliance, Mississippi Religious Leadership Conference, NAACP, and other grassroots organizations. In 2015, Justin had the opportunity to perform one of the first legal gay marriages in the state of Mississippi. In the years to follow, he would participate in many protests and actions with the Poor People's Campaign and Black Lives Matter of Mississippi. When Justin isn't in church or in a protest, you may find him working one of his many hobbies: hiking, baking, cycling, ham radio, and computers. It is Community Church's custom to light a chalice, invoking hope and eternal truth to our worship. Please join us as you can in singing these words. We light this flame to affirm. CCUU's Religious Education Director, Cynthia Ramirez, brings us her words for all ages.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I have some incredible news. The crew of Kids for Change ended their fundraiser, and I'm proud to announce they raised over $1,100 for the homeless. Thank y'all so much for your generosity to the students. We are teaching our children what it is to be a Unitarian Universalist and making sure the inherent dignity and worth of every individual is important. So thank you for that lesson. So, in the Unitarian Universalist tradition, I'm going to read Henry builds a cabin. And you can guess who Henry is and his friends. Some of the UU superheroes come along to help Henry. And this is called Henry Builds a Cabin. One spring day, Henry decided to build a cabin. He borrowed an axe and cut down 12 trees. Oops. Henry cut the logs into square beams. He notched the beams to fit into corner posts, and the posts fit into ceiling beams, and the ceiling beams fit into roof beams. In April, his friend Emerson helped raise the beams, and the work made him hungry. "Henry," he said, "your cabin looks too small to eat in." "It's bigger than it looks," Henry said. And he led his friend to a bean patch he had planted behind the cabin. "When it's finished, this will be my dining room." In May, Henry bought an old shed and took it apart. He nailed the boards on the floor, the roof, and the walls of his cabin. Henry was nailing the last board when his friend Alcott arrived. "Henry," he said, "your cabin looks too dark to read in." "It's brighter than it looks," he said. And he led his friend to a sunny spot behind the cabin. "When it's finished, this will be my library." In June, Henry put a door in front. Then he put 2 used windows in the side walls. He bought old shingles for the roof and walls. Henry was nailing his last shingle when Miss Lydia peeped in the window. "Henry," she said, "your cabin looks too small to dance in." "It's bigger than it looks," said Henry. And he led her to the front of the cabin where a path curved down to the pond. "When it's finished, this will be the ballroom with the grand stairway." On the 4th of July, Henry moved into his cabin. He ate beans in his dining room. He read in his library. And he danced down the grand stairway to the pond. When it started to rain, Henry ran back to his cabin. "It's bigger than it looks," he said. "This is just the room where I wear when it's raining." The end. Community Church Unitarian Universalist is a self-sustaining congregation.
The generosity of members and friends enables the congregation to fulfill its purpose in doing the sacred work of bringing justice, spirituality, and compassion to our community and beyond. You can make your donation online at ccunola.org/stewardship or by texting 504-370-2659. Enter GIVE and you'll be prompted. You can also mail a check to 6690 Fleur-de-Lis Drive, New Orleans, 70124. The congregation is invited to put their gifts in our offering dish. Your support is appreciated. In this time in our service, we continue to weave together the fabric of our community as we take this opportunity to share our sorrows or joys with one another. If you are participating online, you can put your concern or joy in the chat box. A candle will be lit with each sentiment, and then 2 for joys and sorrows that have remained silent within your hearts. And we'll have music while gathering any notes, and then we'll read any that come on online. Does anyone have any joys or concerns they would like to share? Alan.
Well, number one, happy birthday to Laura Corman. I think she's 39 years old. I'm not sure. But anyway, happy birthday to her. Happy getting rid of her eyeball problem. With Marilyn, she had surgery for a cataract removal on Thursday, which went beautifully. And yesterday I had the chance to go up in an airplane for the first time in 4 months, fly around a little bit. really felt good. So lots of joy in my life.
Howard.
I have the pollen is getting to me. I have joy, and I would like to share it with everybody. It's the creation that's being sung at Temple Sinai this afternoon at 2 o'clock. It's Haydn's creation. And I put a couple of signs on it. So I'm going.
Who's singing it? Who's singing?
Symphony chorus.
They meeting?
Yeah, the symphony will be there. Symphony chorus. Yeah.
I didn't know the movie.
It's not well advertised for some reason.
Anyone else? Bill, did you get any online?
I've got a joy. Mary Ann made me this beautiful necklace. And it's spectacular. The lamp with the chakra beams. It's spectacular. Thank you so much.
I'll light one more candle for the joys that are still bubbling up that we're not ready to share yet. And one more for the sorrows that are still weighing a little too heavy to be talked about. Now, we will hear the words from Reverend Justin.
My reading before my sermon is on page 10 of Widening the Circle, the UUA's Commission on Institutional Change report from 2020. We have a deep and rich history with religious ancestors who literally gave up their life energies and life forces to allow us the privilege we enjoy today. Freedom of belief, the task to search for truth and meaning, and the work to bring more justice into the world. Both Unitarians and Universalists were considered heretics by the Christian mainstream of their time. The word heretic means able to choose, and if our traditions have anything in common, it is exercising choice in the search for deeper understanding and faithfulness. Yet the choice is the means in the tenets of Unitarian Universalism, the legacy to be held close. Freedom of belief promotes diversity of thought in our communities and fuels the responsible search for truth and meaning that leads towards the beloved community. This freedom encourages exploration and experimentation, lending creativity and innovation to our communities. Yet over the decades since the consolidation of the Unitarians and Universalists, an overemphasis on individual exploration and experience is the primary, if not sole center of religious experience developed. This centering of the individual decenters the communal as a locus of theological exploration. One of the unintended consequences has been the atomized individualism of the search for truth and meaning without accountability to its impact in communities. This has a correlation with the ways in which justice priorities and practices are lived in congregations. Justice-seeking practices of Unitarian Universalists are often not grounded on spiritual or ritual principles. Instead, justice-seeking takes the place of ritual and religious life. Justice practices cannot be used as surrogates for deepening our spiritual lives. I've been thinking a lot lately about stigma. I decided a few years ago that I wouldn't hide my struggles with depression and anxiety for the most part. I made that decision because of the cultural stigma around mental health in this country, especially in the South. Since I battle against this stigma, it is one that I understand. I understand it when I have to jump through hoop after hoop to get ADHD meds as an adult. In the state of Mississippi, I know we're not in, but that's where I'm from. They limit the amount of medication you're allowed to buy regardless of the doctor's order or expectation. Most ADHD medications are not covered by insurance for people over 18. And in the state of Mississippi, you actually have to take a paper script to the pharmacist to get 30 days of medication filled. It can't be called in or scheduled. In other states, they will require a drug test prior to the writing of the script to prove that you're actually taking the medication. And some doctors or pharmacies will simply refuse to fill those meds, which means that I have to wait until I'm down to a day or two of medication before I can start the process of getting it filled again, which generally leads to excess stress and anxiety. I have to call my doctor in the morning about a day before I run out, get them to write me a script, pick the script up a few hours later, and go to the pharmacist. I have to pick up the script whenever they decide that they have time to write it. Then I have to hope that it's in stock. And I have to explain why I'm taking the medication, and they have to manually enter the information into their system, and I have to make sure they understand in advance that this is not covered by my insurance. Because most insurance companies assume that ADHD stops at the age of 18. Then I have to say, in the past, you all had a coupon that I could use. Is that coupon still active? And then just hope it is because I can't afford the medication without the coupon. Then I wander Target until they have filled the meds. I remember one day, all of this just felt heavy, and I was struggling with what some of us call a low dopamine day, listening to a short story by Shirley Jackson called Demon Lover. See, Shirley Jackson's Demon Lover is a very well-written short story about anxiety. If you're looking for a well-written story about intense social anxiety, this is the story for you. It's the kind of story that takes you along for the ride. The author understands social anxiety from a personal level. She understands the struggle with just saying hello, then asking for what you need with the assumption that you probably won't get it. The main character, who is given no name, wakes up on her wedding day, awaiting her fiancé's arrival. A man who she'd met a month prior, and he's late, so she goes looking for him. Most of the story involves what's happening in her mind. Sometimes she feels silly, sometimes she feels like a child, and sometimes she's afraid just to ask a simple question. Instilled with the fear that her voice is not worthy of being heard, more and more she begins to feel like she must sound crazy. As she meets unhelpful character after character, she begins to fixate on what she must look like until she is just angry, until she snaps. The story carries you through the beginning of an anxiety attack. It's heartbreaking and raw, a well-written story into the mind of a very self-conscious person swimming against the tide in a river of stigma. At one point, the character considers helping or asking for help from the police, but in her own mind, she says this to herself. There was a policeman on the corner, and she thought, why don't I go to the police? You go to the police for a missing person and then thought, what a fool I'd look like. She had a quick picture of herself standing in a police station saying, yes, we were going to be married today, but he didn't come. And the policemen, 3 or 4 of them, standing around listening, looking at her, at the print dress and her too bright makeup, smiling at one another. She couldn't tell them any more than that. Could she not say, yes, it looks silly, doesn't it? Me all dressed up trying to find a young man who promised to marry me. But what about it all of you don't know? I have more than this, more than you see, talent perhaps, and humor, and a sort, and I'm a lady, and I have pride and affection and delicacy, and a certain clear view of a life that might make men satisfied and productive and happy. There's more than you think when you look at me. But she doesn't say the last part. In fact, she doesn't ask for help out of fear of looking silly. It's a great story, but not so great to listen to when I'm trying to get my prescription filled. One of the greatest fears in the adult ADHD community is access to medication, because the stigma around medication is constant. When telling people I have ADHD, will often hear people tell me, when I tell them I take medicine, it's just legal speed, which it's not. It's just the same as meth, which it's not. You know, I'm a little ADHD, but I don't need meds. Then they'll ask questions like, you going to make a little money selling it on the side? Or can't you just figure it out without the meds like everyone else? Then I get this one. Spending time in nature will help you just as much as that medication. Or if you just take this supplement or this one, or use these essential oils, it will be exactly the same. And then if they're really bawdy, they'll say, you sure you're not just lazy? We're hit over the head over and over again by television shows that highlight over-medicated children to the point that much of the culture around us believe ADHD does not exist, really. There is a considerable misunderstanding around the treatment of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. In fact, the name doesn't even really describe what it is. The assumption is that people with ADHD run around all the time with limitless energy, get bad grades, and are just bad behaved, without understanding that the hyperactivity often experienced by people with ADHD, especially adults, is generally just in the mind. Grades may be fine, and emotional regulation can actually become impossible without treatment. Then years of masking ADHD will lead to anxiety, depression, and oddly enough, bad teeth. And then when finally treated, you have to deal with a system that assumes medication is a luxury expense. In Shirley Jackson's story, the main character roams the city looking for help, looking for answers, and most of all, looking for someone willing to take time just to hear her distress, without assumptions. But the city is moving too fast. She visits the superintendent in the building she believes her beau lives in, and to find out where he was staying, and find out that he was renting the room from a family that was gone for the month. Then she would go to the newsstand seller and ask if that man had seen him, or the florist, or the shoeshine man, and all the locals on the street. See, she doesn't know any of these people, and she finds it overwhelming just to talk to them, especially about not being able to find her fiancé. People tend to hit her with microaggressions after that, about her being in the way, about the fact that this man probably may not exist, or he didn't tell you who he was, or he might have just been telling you something to get you in bed. These are all the assumptions that she feels pushed upon her while she does this. By the time we reach the end of the story, she is broken, isolated, and most of all sad. The narrator tells us that she has been stood up. He never comes. And it makes me wonder, would a character like this ever trust the love again? See, Shirley Jackson's story compares an anxiety in a way that she captures anxiety in a way that only someone who understands it can. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, 13% of adults will at some point in their lives suffer from an anxiety disorder, and more than half of those with moderate to severe impairment. The rates for adolescents are the same, about 13%. And my point in all of this is very simple. You can be sure that not only do you know someone with an anxiety disorder, but you see them on a regular basis. In fact, maybe it's you. Maybe you know it's you. Maybe you don't know it's you. And even if they are looking at you with calm, patient eyes, they may be battling chaos and fear inside just to stay in the conversation. Fact is, the world around us is full of broken people. And I believe that Unitarian Universalism can and should offer them hope. But for them to hear our message of hope, we must also create a place that is safe for them to push through their own internalized trauma. It can be difficult creating safe space for others because no space is safe where masking must take place. And I don't mean for COVID, the masking of mental illness. If the expectation put upon us for entry involves the continuation of a trauma that drove us away, many people who suffer from anxiety just will go and not come back. And to really accept the ramifications of that is very complicated and involves considerable decentering, because we create our circles of association based on our own fears and traumas, even if it isn't at a particularly neurotic level like some of us might have. Unitarian Universalism derives from heresies. Though the generations, we remembered them as transcendentalism, humanism, and all forms of liberal religion, we began to centralize within our faith different concepts. We created a container for a wide range of beliefs, and because of our history, the right to express those beliefs became the center of that container. The circle that we formed was open to many. However, the gates are often kept by few. Over time, the responsible search for truth and meaning became, I can believe whatever I want. And that became, I can say whatever I want. Causing the locus of the faith to become the individual experience, hedging itself away from the needs of a community that surrounds it. Many reveled in the right of conscience in the use of the democratic process with disregard for the goal of the world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. If the individual becomes centered completely, we couldn't help but disregard the respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part. In fact, the principles balance the needs of a community and the needs of the one. Our covenant is not individual and it is not utilitarian. It is something much more complicated. A community. A community full of individuals that depend on one another. A group of people connected to an interdependent web. Which means what happens to the least of us matters. It means I am my brother's keeper, And it means that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And it also means that sometimes my voice is not the most important voice in the room, regardless of those who built the circles. Especially if my voice is generally one of the most common voices. So I can have freedom to believe whatever I like as long as I understand that I'm committed to the needs of the community. And I may have the right to believe what I like, but I also have a moral obligation to do no harm. And if that sounds complicated, it's because it is. I'm sorry if life-changing faith isn't easier. But at the end of the day, if we really want to build a church that is truly open to everybody, that becomes a beacon, not just of freedom, but hope and safety. We have to remember that the people who need us the most may not be strong enough to weather your freedom of speech. It doesn't mean it's not important. It just means that maybe the relationship is more important than our right to say whatever we want. If we want to really make a difference in the lives of others, compassion will take you further than any well-reasoned argument ever could. An argument needs a winner when a heart needs an ear. I will tell you this. The people who need us the most are probably some of the most terrified people to walk in the doors. Because we don't look like them or talk like them. And we may not even think like them. Or a better way to say it is they may not think like we do. Because many of us can't even comprehend a world they live in. I started this sermon talking about mental health, but I left a lot of stuff out. Like the fact that racial prejudice exacerbates mental health problems, especially when connected through trauma. Someday we will move past this pandemic and we will fully be face to face again. And a lot of people will walk into our doors afraid. Walk into the doors afraid because they've been gone for so long, because they haven't been around people as much as they could have been. And even I begin to feel a little bit of anxiety as more people look at me than normally have over the last 2 years. And we have to remember that the pandemic was trauma. That racial prejudice is trauma. That the life lived with unexpected or unlivable rules is trauma. And that trauma affects us in so many ways. And those people who suffered that trauma, well, we need you. Because some of you have been through that. And even those of you who haven't, remember that we all see the world differently. And for many people, it's a scary place. And we have to build a sanctuary where they can find peace. But that has little to do with our physical structure. It has more to do with the emotional space that we create within that structure. It has to do with the way we handle our individualism and relate to community. The space we must create is interdependent. I know one of the first places that we can affect this change is in our language. For example, you may be sad, but it doesn't mean you have a little depression. You may have some personality traits resembling those of ADHD or be a little excited at times, but you're not a little ADHD. You may like to do your laundry every day and really like a clean kitchen, but you're not a little OCD. And you may have a mood swing every now and again, but you're not a little bipolar. These are medical diagnoses and ought not be minimized by day-to-day emotions. After eating too much at Thanksgiving dinner and taking a nap, you don't ever hear someone say, well, I'm a little diabetic. So why would I say, I've got a little depression? I'm a little ADHD, I'm a little OCD. These are medical diagnoses that people struggle with and face stigma with every day. After a little coughing, you wouldn't say, I've got a little congestive heart failure. You know, see, there's a difference. However, if you have experienced symptoms of extreme sadness for over 6 months, it's probably time to talk to somebody. If you experience symptoms of ADHD or OCD and you've done enough to look up what that means, you may need to talk to your doctor. And you may need to talk to your doctor more than once, because doctors are affected by the stigma just as much as the world around us is. Because the road to a healthy soul is long and best traveled with friends. Which is why we need to build a place where people around us can begin that journey together. Following the pandemic, there are a lot of hurting people. There are a lot of people who are going to be afraid to walk in your doors because they haven't been around others, because their isolation has become too comfortable. There are people out there who are just glad that they didn't have to deal with it or work with it. People that we can help if we open our hearts, if we open our minds, if we destigmatize our language, and if we build a space that is safe for people who have dealt all their lives with trauma, which is not comfortable, and it's not easy, and it is very much decentering our own minds and our own personalities often. Because we build places that we're comfortable with. We create circles that reflect who we are and assume that we are normal, whether we say it or not. I don't know if I've ever met a person that's normal. I don't know if I've ever met a family that's normal or been to a church that's normal. But the other way that comes off is arrogance, coldness. And if we really want to live the life that is being called to us from Unitarian Universalism, we have to figure out how to lead with the heart, how to lead with compassion, how to make our words count, matter, and how to listen when people struggle. I appreciate you listening to my story. I appreciate you looking with open eyes, and I thank you for hearing what I had to say. At this point.
Do we have some more music?
You got it.
All right.
Wilderness
worship. We hope you found something of value for you. And we hope that you'll choose to add your strength to ours in the coming Sundays. And am I right that we are doing coffee? We are doing coffee once again. Hope to see you all in Fellowship Hall with good conversation. Thank you.